Hi. The cooling unit in the server room let out a low, metallic groan, the kind that sounds like a dying animal trying to whisper a secret. It was Thursday, 2:11 a.m., and I was still logged in under a decoy admin profile, watching CPU spikes twitch like seizure pulses. They'd already fired me 4 days ago. But what they didn't know, what they never bothered to learn, was that the real system didn't run on Jenkins or AWS or their duct-taped agile rituals. It ran on me. The lights in my apartment flickered from the power draw of the 3 machines I'd reactivated. The fourth one, an old Linux tower named Ophelia, whirred back to life like a corpse remembering its favorite song. I didn't build their company. I possessed it. I inhabited it. Here's how it started unraveling. On Monday, I walked into the office to find my ID badge blinking red like a slow heartbeat. The receptionist, new girl, barely old enough to legally rent a car, smiled too wide and said, "Oh, I think there's a meeting for you upstairs." They were already waiting. 5 executives, 1 company lawyer, no chairs for me. Just a printout of my own Slack messages clipped to a manila folder like a death warrant. Brandon, CTO with the vocabulary of a TED talk, but none of the vision. Read my contributions like a grocery list. Version 8.14, core module rebuild. You removed legacy throttling? Yeah, I said, because your bottlenecks were choking live sessions like a noose. He blinked, confused. Legal cleared her throat. You were never authorized to restructure the delivery pipeline. Was I authorized to fix the 19-hour outages your DevOps team couldn't trace for 3 quarters? Silence. Even Karen, the product VP who once called my code a little too assertive for the brand, looked down. Then Brandon smiled, that rehearsed CEO smirk he practices in elevator reflections. Look, we're grateful, truly, but your services are no longer required. And that was it. No thank you, no warning, just a security escort and a fake apology in the form of an email from HR that began with "Hope this finds you well." They thought that was the end. It wasn't. Because while they were busy sunsetting me, they didn't notice the subroutine I buried inside the asset compression utility, or the phantom shell account that only responds to a knock sequence based on Fibonacci primes, or that every time they deployed a hotfix, passed through a ghost module labeled Engine 04 Dusk, a module only I could read. By Friday morning, the servers would be begging for mercy, and Brandon would finally learn that deleting my name from the repo didn't make me disappear. It just made me quiet. Friday, 3:02 a.m. Somewhere in the heart of their data center, an auto-scaling alert began to scream, but only internally, where no Slack ping could reach. Kind of alert that smells like dread if you're smart enough to recognize it. They weren't. Meanwhile, I sat cross-legged in my living room, drinking boxed wine from a Pyrex measuring cup and watching the chaos unfold like it was interpretive dance. Ophelia's terminal blinked rhythmically, lines of code scrolling like prayers in Latin, each one a hymn of vengeance. They thought the core module was just a performance fix. That's what I let them think. Truth was a living system, an invisible spine holding together their Frankenstein beast of microservices. Nobody noticed when I slipped a sentient diagnostic script into the pipeline. Nobody questioned why Heartbeat SH was executing even on sandbox deploys. I named her Delilah. Delilah was patient. She didn't destroy anything. She learned, logged packet behaviors, tracked anomalies. She sniffed out sloppy commits like a bloodhound with a grudge. And tonight, she began to starve them, one node at a time. At 3:14 a.m., the East Coast servers throttled themselves to 8% capacity. 10 minutes later, auto caches started cycling infinite refresh loops. One intern, bless his terrified soul, pinged Brandon on Teams with a screenshot and a shaky, "Are we under attack?" Brandon replied, "It's probably just a misfire from the new CDN." The new CDN I never approved. By 4:02 a.m., load balancers were ping-ponging traffic across dead clusters like blindfolded tennis players. Their e-commerce endpoint went from 0.2's latency to 37 full seconds. Orders failed. Sessions expired. And yet the dashboard read green, because I rewired the monitoring tools to lie. Delilah didn't scream. She whispered. And back in my apartment, I pulled up a command window and typed 4 words. Echo morning, Brandon. That single line triggered a cascade buried 8 levels deep. A shadow failover lit up a dashboard Brandon didn't know existed. Screens across their office, phones, laptops, tablets, flickered once and displayed my message. Center screen, you deleted me, but I wrote your God. Then it all went dark, not forever, just long enough. I didn't want to break their system. Not yet. No, I wanted them begging me to come back. I wanted their board meetings filled with hushed speculation and shaky fingers pointing at log files they couldn't decipher. And I wanted Brandon, Golden Boy Brandon, to have to explain why a feature called Red Widow had suddenly activated across production. Funny thing is, Red Widow wasn't supposed to exist until they fired me. Friday, 6:09 a.m. The email started innocently. Subject, odd latency spikes, and urgent, client seeing 504s, and finally, who is Red Widow? In all caps, like screaming would make the question less humiliating. I'd routed all of them, hundreds, into a shared Slack channel named #RedWidowConfidential, just to watch them swarm like flies around their own incompetence. By the time Brandon rolled into the office in his overpriced, startup-branded hoodie, the place smelled like panic. Monitors blinked with red alerts. Devs were arguing in whispers. The CFO was already on her second anti-anxiety mint strip. Brandon barely made it 3 feet into the war room before Jacob, one of the few engineers who still had a soul, shoved a laptop in his face. "This is real," Jacob said. "This isn't a bug. This is deliberate." Brandon scoffed. "Are you saying we're being hacked?" Jacob just pointed to the terminal. A script had just executed itself on their billing servers. Line by line, the process tree drew a shape. Not logs, not metrics. A symbol, a black widow spider. They didn't even know how it got there. No commits, no trace. Just suddenly, there. Meanwhile, I was across town, sitting in a diner with a greasy menu and coffee that tasted like regret. My phone buzzed, unknown number. I let it ring out. A second later, a voicemail appeared. "Hi, this is Brandon." "Oh, look, I know things got tense. And maybe we didn't. I didn't handle your departure properly. But we've had some anomalies. If there's any chance you're seeing this, call me, please." He sounded hoarse, panicked. Good. I poured cream into my coffee and watched it swirl like smoke from a burning bridge. I didn't call him back, not yet, because I wasn't done. They hadn't even noticed phase 2. You see, Red Widow wasn't just chaos, it was theater. A loud enough distraction that no one noticed what else was happening. Encrypted data siphon working silently underneath the noise, pulling copies of contracts, NDA, internal Slack archives, and my favorite, the raw meeting transcriptions from their confidential audio logs. Turns out, Brandon had quite the mouth on him behind closed doors. We can replace her easy, just offshore the module. Who needs loyalty when you've got currency exchange rates? And my personal favorite, she built the bones, but we own the skeleton. No, Brandon, you own the corpse. The bones walk with me. I saved the audio files. I timestamped them. I even spliced in footage from their investor Zoom calls. By the time the board wakes up and smells the ashes, I'll have already sent them the dossier, all of it, packaged in a nice little deck labeled postmortem. But not yet. First, I needed to watch Brandon sweat through his designer hoodie, realizing his empire was stitched together with borrowed thread. I still held the needle. Let him squirm. Red Widow was still hungry. Friday, 9:37 a.m. Brandon locked himself in the executive conference room with Karen, legal, and a box of breakfast croissants nobody touched. The glass walls did nothing to mute the meltdown. From the security feed, I still had access to, thank you, lazy API key practices. I watched him pacing like a zoo animal that finally realized the glass isn't for show. Stopped pretending it was a bug. They pulled up the logs again. Red Widow's threads had reached into their sandbox environments, churned their staging branches into loops, and started sending fake success flags to Jenkins. They couldn't deploy, couldn't roll back, couldn't trust what was real. Karen whispered something to legal, probably asking if this qualified as a criminal breach. Good luck proving it was me. The signature keys auto-expired. The IPs, chained proxies bouncing through 3 continents. And the code, it rewrote itself after execution. Meanwhile, I was busy writing an entirely different kind of script. I called it inheritance. And it was running right now, inside their financial backbone. You remember how Brandon used to flex about their agile, smart contracts for auto-vendor payouts, how proud he was of their decentralized ledger to ensure transparency and trust. Well, I'd written that too. And Brandon, his infinite arrogance, never once audited the fallback logic for the smart triggers. Inheritance didn't steal a dime. That'd be pedestrian. Instead, it rerouted a portion of every microtransaction, fractions of a cent, into a legal escrow account titled Contingency Royalty Agreement Codebase Originator. Filed 6 months ago. Backdated with a timestamp from a project they thought was mothballed. Legally speaking, they were paying me for every user click. Every minute the site stayed live, my balance ticked up. But that wasn't the part that made Brandon scream. That came later at 10:22 a.m. when Karen opened an envelope that had been delivered by courier. No return address. Inside, a printed transcript of Brandon's quote from that meeting. We can replace her easy, just offshore the module. Underlined, highlighted, with one sticky note attached, replace this. She turned pale. Legal whispered something. Brandon yanked the transcript out of her hands and scanned it, eyes darting like a cornered animal. Then his phone buzzed. A push alert. Their entire investor portal had just gone offline. And on the main page, in bold Helvetica, I wrote your empire in blood, and you're just now seeing the stains. That was phase 3. The exposure. Phase 4, that one was personal. Because as much as I loved watching Brandon spiral, was still one thing he hadn't realized. Red Widow had a second target, and she was already spinning her web around Karen. Friday, 11:45 a.m. Karen locked herself in the HR director's office, called her husband, and whispered something about plausible deniability. Her voice cracked halfway through, like she suddenly remembered I trained her on ops security during her first week. How to spot spoofed logins, how to trace metadata, how to not ever keep your passwords on a goddamn post-it inside your Kate Spade wallet. I had the wallet, took it from her desk Monday morning after they fired me, and made the mistake of leaving me alone for 6 minutes. Just enough time to pull the safe key, snap photos of her login cheat sheet, and slip it back into the Prada knockoff she called vintage. She didn't know I'd been inside her apartment too. That was Tuesday. Her spare key was still taped under the fake rock by the succulent pot labeled Self-Watering Thoughts. I used gloves. Didn't touch anything except the envelope on her kitchen counter, a printed list titled Succession Plan, Post-Termination of AV, me. She drafted it before I got fired, and it wasn't just about offboarding. It had my personal medical info. A flagged note, monitor mental health stability, possible liability risk. Another one, push narrative of burnout during exit interviews. Use wellness angle. They were building a story before they pulled the trigger, so I decided to rewrite theirs. At noon sharp, the first leak hit, a Medium post, anonymous, titled Erased, How My Startup Rewrote History, then tried to gaslight me into silence. I didn't sign my name, didn't need to. The code snippets were mine. The Slack screenshots, the voice memos, the metadata. All time-stamped, verifiable, brutal. By 12:15 p.m., the post had 18,000 views. By 12:27, a Twitter thread went viral dissecting every paragraph. Threads like this is why you don't delete the woman who is your infrastructure. Others started digging. Turns out, I wasn't the only employee they'd quietly disappeared. A second post dropped at 12:45. This one with audio, Karen's voice, from that same Succession memo. Crystal clear, she built the system like a digital diary. It's neurotic. If we cut her out slowly, the system won't even notice. It noticed. And now everyone else did too. The PR team tried to get ahead of it. Released a statement full of words like miscommunication, standard offboarding, and deep respect. But screenshots don't lie. And someone, definitely not me, legally speaking, redirected their corporate blog to display a rolling slideshow of every deleted Slack message they tried to bury. Karen tried to call me around 1:00 p.m. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. You've made your point. Please, just tell me what you want. What I wanted. I wanted them to choke on the version of me they tried to sanitize. I wanted them to explain to the board why a ghost had better source control than their entire dev team. I wanted Karen to know her succession plan was now Exhibit A in a wrongful termination suit I had already drafted and set to auto-send at 2:00 p.m. if I didn't manually abort it. But more than anything, I wanted her to understand what it felt like to be replaced. And Red Widow wasn't done yet, because there was still one more internal Slack channel no one had noticed, one they'd never dare search. #Karen Dev Alt created 3 months ago. By Karen, with code commits under my name. Friday, 2:09 p.m. Karen was mid-sentence on a Zoom call with Brandon and the legal team when her face stopped moving. Her camera feed didn't freeze, she did, because that's the moment she saw the commit logs. The ones from #Karen Dev Alt, timestamped, authenticated, buried in a dormant repo with my initials, my commits, and her fingerprints all over them. Brandon leaned in, squinting. Wait, why is your name listed as co-author on her commits? Karen didn't answer, because now she remembered. 3 months ago, she had asked for code mentoring, wanted help with her technical literacy so she could impress the board. I humored her, sent her snippets, let her shadow 1 or 2 commits, just enough for plausible deniability. What she didn't know was that I kept every screen recording, every screen share, every edit where she copy-pasted my code into a private sandbox and replaced my name with hers. And now, the Git history I'd quietly reinserted showed her fork overriding my original module, then slapping a copyright attribution to herself, which is a violation. A big one, intellectual property theft, at scale. By 2:14 p.m., a notification hit their legal team inbox. My pre-scheduled lawsuit packet, now live, contained everything: proof of falsified authorship, Slack logs where she joked about finally getting her name into the product, a legal affidavit from a former junior dev she pressured into backdating approvals. Then came the kill shot, an email to every board member titled, "When you replace the architect, make sure you don't hand the blueprints to the interior designer." Attached, a side-by-side comparison of my original code versus her contribution. One worked. One had a memory leak so large it had crashed live services within 2 weeks. Guess which one made it into production? The board called an emergency meeting. Karen was removed from the Zoom before it ended. By 3:00 p.m., she was escorted out of the building. Same security guy who'd walked me out on Monday. I watched from a parked car across the street. She looked like a corpse wrapped in panic. No laptop, no phone, just a shattered expression and a shattered legacy. Funny thing, that was still not the end. Because while Karen was busy rewriting my past, Brandon had been quietly doing something worse. Something I hadn't expected. He'd been selling pieces of my architecture to a third-party firm in Luxembourg, licenses, APIs, a full-blown rebrand built on my skeleton. It wasn't just theft, it was laundering. And now I had the proof. Because 2 hours earlier, Delilah had finally decrypted the last locked vault. Inside, a full pitch deck, titled Project Widow, Infrastructure at Scale Without the Baggage. I wasn't a ghost in the machine anymore. I was the Goddamn Plague, and I had just found my next host. Friday, 4:51 p.m., the last vault didn't just contain the pitch deck. It had invoices, wire transfers, shell company contracts, and an email chain that made my skin go cold, even through the thrill. Brandon had been selling Project Widow for 6 months. 6 months. Meaning they'd planned my erasure well before that performance review he called a formality, before the surprise audit of my modules, before Karen asked me to mentor her on distributed threading models that, oh surprise, wound up magically appearing in her Q1 objectives. They didn't just fire me, they prepped for it, like assassins. But they forgot I wrote the bullets they loaded. Luxembourg firm, Romlicht Systems AG, wasn't some random buyer. It was a Brandon-backed holding company, registered under a retired cousin's name. The bastard had been building a shadow company under a false identity while I was debugging their outage logs at 3 a.m. He'd even cloned parts of my architecture into a sandbox environment and sold them with his name stamped all over. The documents weren't vague. He called it self-designed backbone logic. There it was, in his own words, so I wrote a little email. Subject line, about your recent acquisition to Romlicht Systems legal attachments. 73 MB of hell I didn't threaten, I didn't even accuse. I just laid out a technical dissection of every module, annotated with timestamps, original ownership, and hashes from the earliest internal commits, proving that what they'd been sold wasn't Brandon's, but mine. Within 14 minutes, I got a reply from a Zurich-based IP counsel. We were unaware of any conflicting ownership claims. Effective immediately, all licensing discussions with Mr. Brandt have been suspended pending legal review. Mr. Brandt. He wasn't even using Brandon anymore. Just Brandt. How silicon fucking villain of him. I forwarded the email to his executive team. CC'd their head of compliance. He CC'd 2 tech journalists who'd been sniffing around since the Medium post hit 300K views. And then, for good measure, I uploaded a redacted version of the entire pitch deck, highlighting every lie, every theft, every betrayal, and scheduled it to post from an anonymous GitHub page called Widow Reborn. Friday, 5:25 p.m. One of the investors, Lena Zhu, their only adult in the room, resigned publicly via LinkedIn. Post, I don't invest in stolen ground. Not when the real architect is still building cathedrals beneath their feet. The stock price dipped 12% in 1 hour. The board suspended Brandon pending investigation. The HR portal went offline. And the company's internal wiki, once sanitized of my name, was now being reversioned by an army of anonymous editors, restoring my authorship on every core system. But I wasn't watching that. I was already in my car, driving west. My phone buzzed with messages I didn't check, emails I didn't open. The servers would live or die on their own now. Ophelia, the tower I built from scratch in college, sat quietly in my trunk, still warm. She'd done her job, but I wasn't done. Not yet. Because deep in the final folder Delilah decrypted, there was a single TXT file. AV final offer TXT created 3 weeks before my firing, modified 2 hours after. By someone outside the company. Someone with access to both my architecture and my personal health files. The web didn't end at Brandon. It reached somewhere deeper, and the widow had just followed its thread into the dark. Friday, 7:08 p.m. I pulled into the motel lot just off Route 50, the kind of place where the vending machines take quarters and the Wi-Fi password is taped to the ice machine. Room 17. Door didn't close right unless you hip-checked it. I liked that. Ophelia hummed to life as I laid her down on the chipped desk. No internet, air-gapped, safe. I opened the file, AV Final Offer TXT. It was a draft contract, not from the company, from BioQuantics Health Systems. A biomedical R&D firm I'd never worked for, never even heard of, until I started tracing IP logs embedded in the redacted meeting summaries I pulled from Karen's folder. Turns out, Brandon had been shopping my brain around like a proprietary asset. Specifically, my patterns, my workflow, my neurocognitive behavioral footprint. You know that productivity software they asked me to trial last year? The one Karen said was experimental, but totally harmless. It wasn't measuring performance. It was profiling me. Keystroke cadences, decision trees, reaction times to stress test injections in the codebase. My subconscious architecture logic was mapped and sold to BioQuantics to help train an AI model for adaptive reasoning systems. They didn't just want my code. They wanted my thinking. And that TXT file, it was an offer for full acquisition of cognitive mapped systems attribution. In layman's terms, they sold my mind without telling me, and the buyer paid 7 figures. My stomach flipped, not from betrayal, but from the pure, crystalline clarity. This wasn't about Brandon anymore, or Karen, or a company. This was about theft on a level most people don't have a word for. They hadn't just erased my name. They tried to digitally exhume me, mine my neural patterns like I was a fossil, and upload my ghost into a machine they could monetize. So I uploaded something of my own. The full story, not the blog version. The forensic trail, every recording, every log, every fingerprint. I bundled it into a cold storage drive, encrypted it under 3 layers of biometric Deadman switches, and mailed 5 copies, each with a different key fragment, to 5 different journalists, lawyers, and digital rights watchdogs. If I don't call in by Monday at noon, the fragments recombine, and the whole goddamn internet gets a copy. Then I posted one last message to their public-facing DevOps forum. Under my original handle, long since deleted, now resurrected, you erased me. You sold my voice. Now let's see how the market values a scream. Then I powered down Ophelia. Stepped outside. The sky was purple-gray, that dead zone color before a storm. The kind that warns the world it's about to get honest. I lit a cigarette. I don't even smoke. Watched the motel sign flicker. Half-lit, buzzing like a secret it couldn't hold. Brandon's empire was burning. Karen's career was ash. Their servers were ghosts. And BioQuantics. They'd soon learn that Red Widow doesn't stop at code. She evolves, and she remembers everything.